Welcome back to the Pylon Cam. It's your boy Mike back with another mock draft video. Today we are going to be doing a mock to mock, which I have not done in a very long time. And I'm very excited to do this. We're mocking Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft 3.0, where I will give my views, thoughts, and opinions on the picks and whether I think they're good picks, bad picks, if I would go in a different direction, maybe a different prospect. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the mock draft. With pick 1, he has the Titans selecting Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward has become an underrated prospect throughout this process. And you could be saying, how are you saying that? He's literally going at pick 1. Well, the thing is, for me, if he was coming out last year, I would have had him at right behind Jaden Daniels in my rankings. I'm very, very high on Cam Ward. I think he is catching a lot of strays because people think this is a bad quarterback class, or because they had Shedeur Sanders at QB1 and now they have to react and, change their stance. And I think a lot of people don't like doing that because that means they have to admit that they were wrong. For me, I think as a Giants fan, I would love for the Giants to get up to pick 1 for Cam Ward. I'm not sure if that's going to happen at this point in time. I think if it does happen, it'll be closer to the draft because the Titans want to raise that price of that pick and force a lot of pressure onto any front office trying to get to pick 1. But I have absolutely no issue with Cam Ward at pick 1. I'm very, very high on Cam Ward, and I love this pick for the Titans. Pick 2, we have Cleveland Browns taking Abdul Carter. I don't really think that this is realistic given where the Browns are as a franchise and where their front office is, because they're in a very similar spot to Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. That is Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. And I don't think they're in any position to take Carter and then gamble on trying to get back into round 1 for Tyler Shuck potentially, or probably Jackson Dart. I don't think they're going to be able to do that. I also think that the whole Deion's not going to let Shedeur play in Cleveland is complete BS. I know there's that clip from that podcast or whatever that came out years ago or recently that he would intervene. I don't think that he's going to do that. I think that's smoke. And he also did come out in December of last year and say that that anybody saying he's going to intervene is stupid. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm not the biggest Shedeur Sanders fan, but it's not because of who he is as a person or because of anything like that. I think anybody hating on Shedeur Sanders for how he carries himself, either in front of a microphone, on the field, off the field, that's not for us to judge because we don't know the person. We don't know anything about Shedeur Sanders aside from who he is as a player. And I just don't think Shedeur Sanders is worth a top 3 pick potentially because, in my opinion, he has a very limited ceiling. I think in order for him to become a top 10 quarterback in the league at any given point in his career, he's going to have a Miami Dolphins offense around him or a Detroit Lions offense around him. He's not going to be a type of player like Cam Ward or Jaden Daniels or Drake May. And I still believe Caleb Williams, who can carry an offense. I don't think that is in the cards for Shedeur. But that's not a bad thing because being able to play in structure is a very, very important quality in the NFL that a lot of people overlook. So I don't think that Abdul Carter should not go at pick 2. I think he's also in play for pick 1 because I think he's the best player in the draft. But I think that it's unrealistic given where the Browns are as a franchise. So pick 3, we have the Giants going Shedeur Sanders. If Shedeur Sanders makes it to 3, whether I like it or not, they're going to take Shedeur Sanders. So I have no issue with this pick. I just think that Jackson Dart has a higher ceiling, and I think that he is as good as Shedeur is now. I think that I don't want to talk too much about Jackson Dart right now because we're talking about this pick. But I do know that the Giants are very, very high on Shedeur Sanders. Brandon Brown, the assistant GM for the Giants, is probably the highest person in the NFL on Shedeur Sanders, potentially, because he's been scouting Shedeur Sanders since last year. So I have no issue with this pick. It's not what I would do if I were the Giants. Pick 4, you have the Patriots going Travis Hunter. I love this pick. I think Abdul Carter is in play. I think Armand Membu is in play. But I think that Travis Hunter, the conversation around him has become so much of what he can't do rather than what he can do. And in my opinion, he is the best wide receiver in this draft if he were to play full-time wide receiver. Very Garrett Wilson-like, in my opinion. An incredible separator. He has some of the best releases in the class. If I were taking him for the Giants, for example, a team that probably views him more as a corner than wide receiver, I think you put him in on offense on third down or in the red zone because he just separates so effortlessly. But if you're the Patriots, I think that you've had such a hard time bringing in receiver talent. You're getting probably the best person you could have got, someone who is as good as the best person you could have gotten in free agency or via trade, unless you think that A.J. Brown was a realistic possibility. But I think Travis Hunter is absolutely someone who could command 10 targets a game, 12 targets a game, and just come in and be a very good wide receiver one for Drake May on day one. And you look to address the offensive line later in the draft. No issues with this pick. Pick 5, this is the first issue I have. Jaguars going Jalen Walker. To me, I guess I have no problem if they were to go edge. I just don't think it's what they want to do. I think that the two names that come to mind are Mason Graham from Michigan or Armand Membu. And I think that with how shaky the offensive line has been around Trevor Lawrence for so long, I don't see them taking a hybrid linebacker who can play off the ball or on the ball. I'm not saying Jalen Walker is not a good prospect. I'm just saying at pick 5 to the Jaguars is very rich to me. I've seen his name a lot to the Panthers at pick 8. I think that's also very rich. I think it's just these teams are looking for an edge presence. And Jalen Walker, from everything I've read and seen, he wants to be both. He wants to play off the ball, on the ball, and do it all. So I don't think that this is the best pick the Jaguars can make at 5, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. To me, I think the best pick for the franchise, which is Trevor Lawrence, is Armand Membu, who can play left tackle or possibly right tackle. So I'm not a huge fan of this pick. The Raiders at pick 6 go Ashton Genty. This is becoming more and more common. They did sign Raheem Mostert. I think the conversation becomes, because you're going to be picking pretty high in round 2 unless you traded that for Geno Smith, but I think you traded the 3rd round pick for Geno Smith, if I'm not mistaken. I think this should be Mason Graham, personally. I think it should be something on defense or Ashton Genty. I think Ashton Genty is a top 3 player in the draft, don't get me wrong, but I think with how rich this offense, this running back draft is, you could address this as the top of the 2nd round with potentially Travion Henderson, potentially Quinshon Judkins, or later with Bashal Tootle, Damian Martinez. There's just so many names that you can get a good running back in on day 2. I don't think you need to take Ashton Genty, but if you want that catalyst for your offense, you're going to have someone who's top 2 at the position in Brock Bowers and someone who's probably going to end up at some point in his career top 5 at the position in Ashton Genty. So I don't hate this pick. I'm just not sure if it's what the Raiders need. I know they need a running back, but this is such a good running back class. I just don't know if it's my favorite pick in the world for the Raiders. Jets at pick 7. They're going to take Armand Membu. This is one of my favorite picks in the entire draft. I think it's in last year, I was right in predicting Olu Fashanu to the Jets, which ended up happening, and he is your franchise left tackle. I think Olu Fashanu is going to be one of the top left tackles in the league at some point. And I think if you take Membu to put him on the right side of the line, now you have your 2 bookend tackles. And then you have, I'm blanking on his name, but the coach, Aaron Glenn, coming from the Detroit tree. He knows what went into drafting Penei Sewell back in 2022. Yeah. Or was that 21? No, 21. Penei Sewell back at 21. And I think he's going to follow suit here, doing the same thing with the Jets at pick 7. My only hesitation with this pick is, does Aaron Glenn want someone on his side of the ball, which the Jets defensive unit is very good. I just don't know who you have on the interior outside of, I'm blanking on his name, Keenan Williams. So I like Mason Graham or Armand Membu here to the Jets at 7. Pick 8, Mason Graham comes off the board. I think this is the dream for the Panthers. I think this is the absolute floor for Mason Graham. I don't see him going much later than this, but I do see him going a lot earlier to this. I think he's in play at pick 5 all the way through pick 8 for every team. I think any team can take Mason Graham. But you have Derek Brown coming back from injury, and then you add Mason Graham here. I think no matter what, this pick is defense. I think there are 4 players in play here for the Panthers, being Mason Graham, Mike Green, James Pierce, and Jahdae Barron. I think Jahdae Barron comes in play if you make a trade for someone like Trayvon Walker, which will probably cost you like a 3rd or 2nd round pick because you're going to have to pay him after this year. So I think this is definitely going to be defense. I think it's definitely going to be defensive line. Wide receiver is such a need, but there's nobody, in my opinion, worth a top 10 pick. Especially because this team wants to shape they wanted to shape their offense around Adam Thielen and Deontay Johnson before Deontay Johnson went nuts. So Dave Canales obviously values that separator, that high volume target guy. And that player is just not here at pick 8. So I have no problem with Mason Graham at pick 8. Pick 9 is the Saints with Jihad Campbell. Mel Kiper had the Saints take Jackson Dart here at 9, which I don't think is crazy, because I have had Jackson Dart in the first round for months. I got crucified for it a few months ago. Now Mel Kiper has him at 9. So that take has stood the test of time. I have been spot on with my evaluation of Jackson Dart so far throughout the process of talking about him as a first-round pick, to him crushing the Senior Bowl, to him crushing the Combine, and now he's a top 10 pick, and people are trying to pick him apart for, the Ole Miss offense. It's all the same arguments they held against Bo Nix, but I think Jackson Dart is is similar to where Bo Nix was, but he's also 4 years younger, so or 3 years younger. For the Saints, I think that this needs to be an edge presence, because you have Chase Young, but you need to look at life beyond Cam Hayward. But I think Jihad Campbell is the best linebacker in the class. I was so fine with the Chase Young re-signing, because he gives you 50 pressures a year. I don't think he gets enough credit for how consistent he is in getting pressures on a week-to-week basis. But I think getting another high-end edge rusher like Mike Green here would be better than taking an off-the-ball linebacker like Jihad Campbell, who I do like a lot, and I think he's in play pretty much anywhere from 9 to 12. So I think he'll come off the board, be the first linebacker off the board before Jalen Walker, in my opinion. Pick 10 is the Bears, and they're going to go with Will Campbell. If Ashton Jeanty is not here at pick 10, I think this is absolutely the pick. Ben Johnson knows the value of an offensive line, and I think even though they traded for Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson, and then signed Drew Dahlman from Atlanta, I think that Will Campbell is still very much on top of their big board, because you now are taking Will Campbell and putting him in a spot where you don't need him to be a day one starter. I think a lot of teams think he's going to be tackle. A lot of people think he'll stay at tackle. I see him more at guard personally, and it has nothing to do with the arm length. I just think he's such a dynamic athlete, and if you can find someone to be a more traditional size tackle, it makes a lot of sense. But at worst, you put him at tackle, and hopefully it works. But if it doesn't, you got another guard who can learn from Joe Thuney or Jonah Jackson. So I think this is absolutely a slam dunk pick. Pick 11 is the 49ers, and they're going Jahdae Barron. This is also one of my favorite fits in the draft, especially they lost Travarius Ward, and I think that after losing him, adding Jahdae Barron, who's probably one of the safer picks in the draft, at a position of need is a huge plus for the 49ers. I think that tackle and guard are still big needs on this team, but with who's available right now, unless you want to convince yourself of Kelvin Banks or Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly, Jahdae Barron is probably the best pick unless Will Campbell falls to 11, which he almost did in this mock. So at pick 12, we have the Dallas Cowboys going Matthew Golden. I have literally no problem with Matthew Golden being the first receiver off the board, especially after Steve Smith gave his blessing and has Matthew Golden as wide receiver 1, because we all know Steve Smith knows what he's talking about when it comes to wide receivers. I'm not saying that because he was a wide receiver. If you haven't checked out his podcast or his wide receiver evaluations throughout the years, he's pretty spot on. My issue with this pick is the Cowboys defense has taken hits, and you don't know what's going to happen with Micah Parsons. All the reports are the first offering they made to Micah Parsons was insulting. And I don't know what Jerry Jones is doing because I just don't know where he's at with this team. And I do love DeMario Overshown. I think he was one of my favorite players in that draft. But the injuries have caught him every season. So this is also one of the worst linebacker rooms in the NFL, which is why I talked about Giant Campbell going here at pick 12. I think this is the floor for him. I think this pick will be defense. 100% this pick will be defense. You lost Tank Lawrence, so edge is definitely in play. I just don't think there's a position on this defense where you shouldn't be looking to bring in competition, especially on the defensive line or in the linebacker core. So I don't hate Matthew Golden. Wide receiver is a position of need. I just don't know if you address it here at pick 12. Miami Dolphins at pick 13. This has got to be the weirdest team to mock for this year. There always is one team where you really don't know what they're going for. I had Malachi Starks going to the Dolphins at pick 13 in my first mock, and that was when they had Javon Holland. I think Malachi Starks is more in play now that Javon Holland is gone. But how long are you going to ignore the offensive line is my question. I think that, Mike McDaniels had a lot of confidence in the offensive line last year and said that the fans are more worried about it than they are. And he was wrong, and the fans were right, and the offensive line was a huge disaster. I would like this pick to be a Kelvin Banks to play tackle because Teron Armstead is still up in the air about if he's playing this year. Last time I checked, I could be wrong. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But I think that Kelvin Banks or Gray Zabel is someone who I'm very, very high on. I think offensive line should be the pick here over safety with where this team is at. I know they need to win, but winning starts with protecting Tua and making sure he's healthy and not in concussion protocol. And I don't mean that in a joking way, but not a joking way. Pick 14 is Tyler Warren to the Colts. The Colts roster, when you look at it, is just so well put together, in my opinion. They do have a need at obviously quarterback, in my opinion, and tight end. I think that Warren is probably the most polarizing player in the draft. If you're involved in fantasy Twitter at all, a lot of people, shockingly, are not fans of Tyler Warren because of the separation issues and him being a, quote, manufactured touch merchant. I don't buy that, to be honest. I've watched him play myself. I think that Tyler Warren probably will be the first pass catcher off the board, in my opinion, unless you consider Ashton Genty a pass catcher. But I think that Tyler Warren's definitely in play. I think, though, with where Kwity Paye is at, and then you have Latu Latu, who I was very, very high on. He's one of my favorite picks of the draft last year. I would like this to be Mike Green or James Pierce, because this is a deep tight end class, and I don't think you need to. I think the offensive skill position room, not including tight end, is better than people want to give it credit. I think Michael Pittman is the most forgotten about wide receiver in the NFL. He signed a massive extension last year. He's worth that money. Josh Downs was one of my favorite players in his draft class. I think that with him, the proof is in the pudding that when Anthony Richardson didn't play, Josh Downs was very good. And they signed Daniel Jones, who I like more than a lot of people, got killed for that take. But I think Daniel Jones will probably end up winning this job or starting at some point. I just think with Anthony Richardson, unless his accuracy, it's got to climb at least 15% to become viable. He's under 55% I think he's at 54% last time I checked. And that's just not sustainable in the NFL, especially with him being hurt a lot. Him checking out of the game was a complete disaster. But I think with Steichen and how he has been able to get the most out of quarterbacks, I would not be surprised if Daniel Jones follows the trend of Giants who have left the team and becomes the best version of himself on the Colts. Whatever that is. Daniel Jones, to his credit, did have one of the best playoff performances ever against a very bad Vikings defense, but he still went toe-to-toe with one of the best offenses in the sport, with not a lot around him, being Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, Darius Slayton, a pretty spotty offensive line outside of Andrew Thomas, and then obviously Saquon Barkley was still there, but I do think Daniel Jones, in my opinion, if he can reset mentally, will be a lot better than what he was the last year on the Giants. Pick 15 is Will Johnson to the Falcons. I don't hate this pick. I just think it's a bad pick for the Falcons, and here's why. You not only have not had an edge presence for years, you now lost Grady Jarrett. So your defensive line pretty much doesn't exist. And you've had good secondary play, but corner, I understand it's a need, but do you pass up on Mike Green or James Pierce here is my question. Because I don't think the answer to that is yes, unless you go ahead and trade for someone like Trayvon Walker from the Jaguars, who has quietly gotten better every single year. He's just overshadowed because of Aiden Hutchinson. And he was picked before Aiden Hutchinson. So he's obviously going to catch a lot. The Jaguars are going to catch a lot of flack for that. He's going to catch a lot of flack for that. I think this pick is 100% defensive line. 100%. Will Johnson is one of the best corners in the class. I'm not saying he's a bad player. There are questions with the medicals, but I would feel for Falcons fans if they did not address the defensive line at pick 15 with how deep this defensive line is. This defensive line class is. Arizona Cardinals at pick 16 go Gray Zabel. There's not really many bigger Gray Zabel fans out there than myself, to be honest. I think Gray Zabel is one of the best offensive linemen in the class, whether you think he's a guard or a tackle, which is the weird thing about this offensive line class. A lot of the tackles have guard associated with them, Gray Zabel being one of them. But I don't think that Josh Sweat or Dalvin Tomlinson stop you from going defensive line here, which is what I have mocked here at pick 16, specifically Walter Nolan here at pick 16. Well, I actually don't even think is in the first round of this mock, which is just, I would hope the Giants can snag him at 34, but I don't think that's realistic. I think he's 100% going to go in the first round. But I think that Mike Green, again, I said Mike Green's name a lot. James Pierce, I said his name a lot. I don't think that any of the signings you made stop you from addressing edge or defensive line. I also am not sure. I know you have B.J. Ojulari, who I was a very big fan of. He's been hurt. He followed his brother's footsteps, and they cannot stay on the football field. And then you drafted Darius Robinson last year, he got hurt. He didn't play a whole lot. You need to see more of him this year. And I don't think that B.J. Ojulari or Darius Robinson stop you from adding competition to this room. I think as a Giants fan, I have learned very painfully over the years, it's best not to bank on breakouts. Always have a backup or a contingencies plan. And I think that addressing this in the first round, especially with James Gannon as your head coach, defensive-minded head coach, makes a lot of sense because the guards in this class, I think, will fall. Unless they view Gray Zabel as tackle, which a lot of people do, but here you see Daniel Jeremiah has him listed as interior, so I'm assuming they're taking him as a guard. I'm not sure if I'd take a guard in the top 16 when your defense still needs so much work. And I know a lot of people get mad because I've seen a few people take wide receiver here. My issue with taking wide receiver here at pick 16 has nothing to do with who the Cardinals have on their roster because they need to add competition to that group. I know Michael Wilson has shown flashes. Marvin Harrison Jr., a lot of people, I think, soured on him because of fantasy mostly, but you also have to look at the contemporaries like Ladd McConkey, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. So a lot of people are just disappointed with how he's worked out. I have no worries about Marvin Harrison, to be honest. I think he's still going to be a dominant wide receiver one the next year. His dad had identical stats to him his rookie year, so I'm not worried about it. I'm more worried about Kyler Murray holding Marvin Harrison back than Marvin Harrison being a good player, if that makes sense. My issue is there's no wide receiver at 16 worth taking, in my opinion. But that is a lot on the Arizona Cardinals, so let's go to the next pick. Bengals at pick 17. Mike Green comes off the board here. Slam dunk pick, in my opinion. This is my edge 2 in the class. I think that this pick, no matter how you look at the Bengals, no matter if they bring Trey Hendrickson back, no matter what they do. This draft for the Bengals is going to be defense and offensive line. Which is like, I feel like we say this every year about the Bengals. Offensive line. Back to 2021 when the debate was Penei Sewell or Jamar Chase. Which, again, you couldn't really go wrong with either pick, in my opinion. But I think that this is 100% defense. There's no tackle worth taking here. I don't think, unless I'm blanking on someone, but this pick is going to be edge rusher or secondary. And I know that the Bengals have brought a lot of people back. They brought B.J. Hill back. They're trying to bring Trey Hendrickson back and many more that I'm forgetting. But this, they have said it themselves. We are going to demand a lot from this this draft class. And it's going to be defense because they can't pay anybody on defense. Any big defensive free agents, good Lord. Because of how much money is going to Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. Which the T. Higgins contract, my God, was that a bad deal for T. Higgins? Anyways, not because he stayed on the Bengals, but because it's 1 year guaranteed and the Bengals have year-to-year control. So it's a 1 year contract, essentially, even though it's a 4-year deal. But anyways, Seattle pick 18, go Colston Loveland. I don't hate this because the Seahawks need a tight end. They do. But I don't know if, again, this is a deep tight end class. I don't know if this is the pick to make when you have glaring needs at center, guard, right tackle, and edge. I know you brought in Tank Lawrence. You have Leonard Williams, gift from the Giants. And you have Boye Mafe and some other dudes. You have a lot of edge rushers, but you don't have a guy in the edge room unless DeMarcus Lawrence has another year like he did in years past. That is a step up from 2024 because he had a bad 2024. I don't blame him for that as much as he probably checked out and didn't want to be part of the Dallas Cowboys anymore, in my opinion. For me, James Pierce is here. Mike McDonald, defensive head coach. I don't know if Colston Loveland is the best pick to make. I mean, if Tyler Warren was here, it's a different story. But I don't think that ignoring guard, like I like Gray Zabel here a lot to the Seahawks. I think he'll make it here to the Seahawks because he went 2 picks higher to the Cardinals, and I just don't see them taking a guard at pick 16 when they still need so much help on defense. So not a huge fan of this pick, but I understand it. Scrolling down. Okay, pick 19, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They go Donovan Ezraku. I think even though you signed Hassan Reddick, there's still a lot of needs on the defense because it's getting older. Not because it's bad, but because this roster is getting very, very old. I think Ezraku is one of the best edge rushers in the class. I think that I would probably prefer James Pierce over him, but I do like Ezraku, and I think that this is addressing a position of need. If they have Ezraku higher on their board, then sure, go crazy. But I don't think that this is a bad pick. I think, like, again, my preference would be James Pierce, but I do think that in some form, this will be a defensive line pick. So I do like this pick a lot by DJ. 20, Omarion Hampton to the Broncos. This is a pick I have been making a lot personally in my free time as I am preparing for videos like this and content like this. I think you signed Evan Ingram, so now, if Tyler Warren is here, or that changes things, but if Colston Loveland's here, you're not really looking at him. I think Omarion Hampton, my player comp, I guess I put this out there because it's pretty firm in my mind. I think he's like another Nick Chubb. I think that this kid is just a freak of nature, and he would be the RB1 in this class if Ashton Jeanty was never born. I agree with that sentiment. I think running back is a huge need for Sean Payton's offense to work. You didn't get it with Javonte Williams. You maybe can get it this year with Audric Estime, maybe, but I would not. Again, I'm a big believer in not banking on breakouts. I think that Omarion Hampton is here. You run this to the stands and have a great night. So I love this pick by DJ. Pick 21 is Jackson Dart. So I am a huge Jackson Dart fan. That's no secret if you follow me on Twitter. which I highly encourage you to do. But I think that my issue with this pick is we don't know if this is the Steelers' QB3. Okay? There's been a lot of discussions about them with Jalen Milroe. They took him out to dinner, confirmed, and Tyler Shuck. I think they're going... QB isn't E. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm saying, Steelers fans. I think you guys are going to sign Aaron Rodgers. And if you sign Aaron Rodgers, you already traded for DK Metcalf. Do you take this pick and go, a win-now piece, like something to bolster the secondary or on the defensive line? Or I think, Trey Amos is in play here. As Ezariah Thomas is in play here. There's just so many corners in this class. I think, though, personally, if it's me, if I'm pushing the buttons and I'm building this team my way, you're not gonna see a prospect like Jackson Dart, in my opinion, fall this far. This would be like Bo Nix falling at 21. You're not gonna see this happen very often in very many drafts. And if you're the Steelers, you don't pick high enough because you're always a 500 team. So I have no issue with this pick, personally. I just don't think it's going to happen because, A, you're going to get Aaron Rodgers. B, do they love Jalen Milroe more, which I think would be crazy to take him over Jackson Dart. But I understand DJ's thought process here, and I get it. I just don't know how realistic it becomes if they sign Aaron Rodgers. But at this point, they haven't signed Aaron Rodgers. And at the time I'm recording this, it's releasing next week. Aaron Rodgers could be a Steeler or a Giant, and I'll look dumb. But we don't know yet. So pick 22 is the Chargers, and they go Tet McMillan. So Matthew Golden went at 12. This is where I see receivers start coming off the board. So I think this receiver class is very similar to 2023, where you got these guys. The only receiver that shocked me that they fell was Jackson Smith-Njigba. I thought that Jackson Smith-Njigba was a slam dunk pick. He is proven to be a slam dunk pick. Probably should have gone higher than 21 or 20 or wherever he went. I remember banging the table for the Giants to trade up for Jackson Smith-Njigba, but they did not do that. Chargers go Tet McMillan. This is exactly where I see Tet McMillan going in the draft. I think if he doesn't go here, he could fall to 23 and go to the Packers, who need a wide receiver 1. I don't know if Tet McMillan is a wide receiver 1 in the sense of I think everybody's perception on what a wide receiver 1 is has changed or is outdated, I think is a better way of putting it, because I think everybody thinks 6'4", 6'3", 6'2", boundary player, contested catch guy. To me, that's not a wide receiver 1 in the NFL anymore, the modern NFL, because you're seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's the complete opposite of all that. No question wide receiver 1. No question. Jackson Smith-Njigba is another guy. No question wide receiver 1, in my opinion. Cooper Kupp, same style receiver, slot guy. No question wide receiver 1, given when he was playing. I think the wide receiver 1 in the NFL has become a high-volume target guy who could take 10 to 12 targets a game, give you 1,200 yards in a season. That type of guy is a wide receiver 1. I like Tet McMillan. I am working on my wide receiver rankings right now. There are better players at the position, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of Trey Harris. But for the Chargers, tying this back into the Chargers, I like this pick a lot because of who Justin Herbert has played with in the past. We've seen him play with Keenan Allen, who's more of that Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown type player. But then you also have Mike Williams back in his prime. And what Justin Herbert was able to do with Mike Williams when he was on the field and not injured. I think Tet McMillan is an incredible yak player. I think he's your boundary. He would be the wide receiver 1 on this team yesterday. And they did bring back Mike Williams, and I don't think that stops you from taking a receiver, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see how they fit him into the offense. And I think he's a perfect complement to Ladd McConkey, who, in my opinion, is the wide receiver 1 on this team, with Tet McMillan even in the fold. But I love this pick. I have made this pick myself. I think it's a good pick. I think, though, you can make the argument that this should be interior defensive line or edge, and then you take Trey Harris in the second round. That's my counter argument. And I think that's a very realistic possibility because I have no idea where Trey Harris is going. And I don't mean to get on a soapbox about Trey Harris, but I have no idea where he is going. But all I do know is he's criminally undervalued. Unless he ends up going round 1 and nobody's talking about it. But anyways, pick 23 is Packers, and they go Maxwell Hairston. Maxwell Hairston, if you didn't know, phenomenal combine. I think he had he had a slam dunk combine. And I understand Packers are looking into the life of post Jair Alexander. But in my opinion, corner is not what this team is missing right now. You need a pass rusher bad. And it showed up in the playoffs. Like, they made the playoffs. Correct? Anyway, I'm having a complete brain fart. I'm pretty sure they made the playoffs. But pass rush, and you drafted Lucas Van Ness pretty high, if I'm not mistaken, a couple years back in 2023, I believe, and he has just not been it. And outside of him, who do you really have on that defensive line to rush the passer? So in my opinion, James Pierce is still sitting here. If Donovan Ezeraku is still here, which he's not, or you could go interior and bolster the interior defensive line with Walter Nolan or Kenneth Grant or any of these guys. I just don't know if Hairston is what this team needs the most on the defensive side of the ball. There's all that chatter about they need a wide receiver 1, which I do agree with. I'm a very big Jaden Reed fan. I'm not sure if he's being used the best in that offense because they're trying to, get Romeo Doubs in play, Dontavian Wicks in play, Christian Watson in play. They're just trying to make. It just feels like this offense has become so manufactured for which receiver they're trying to feature that day or that week. And there's no wide receiver 1 here worth taking. I think Trey Harris would actually be a perfect fit for this offense, unironically, in round 2 if he's there. But for me at 23, I probably would like to see this become an edge rusher over a corner. Minnesota Vikings at 24. They're going safety with Nick Imawari, who he's my safety 2 in the class. I have no issue with this pick because they have had the best free agency class of any team in the NFL. It's not even close. This team, depending on JJ McCarthy, is a Super Bowl roster, in my opinion. And this team doesn't have many holes on it at this point. I mean, your interior line kind of fell apart towards the end of the season. Christian Darrisaw got hurt for the season. And then you bring in Jeff Okudah, who I don't get how Jeff Okudah just isn't good at football in the NFL, but I know he tore his Achilles, but apparently Brian Flores is a huge Jeff Okudah fan, and people think he is going to Sam Darnold him. Unironically, that was the exact quote I saw. That Brian Flores has his Sam Darnold and Jeff Okudah. And if he could bring out the best of Jeff Okudah, and then you bring in Nick Imawari to play on the back end, it's all on JJ McCarthy to bring this team to the promised land because the roster's there, in my opinion. So I got no issue with this pick. I'd like to see them go corner, just in case they can't fix Jeff Okudah. You maybe could go Trey Amos or, excuse me, Ezra Thomas. But, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of corners in this class, and if you want to take a safety in round 1, I'm not going to stop you. Houston Texans go Kelvin Banks. Okay, so I have no issue with this pick. Why I side like that is because if this pick is anything but offensive line, I think it's a mistake at this point. Because you traded Laramie Tunsil, you traded Kenyon Green, who I get wasn't the best player during his time on the Texans. I have no doubt the Eagles are going to bring the best out in him, and that's no slight to the Texans. It's just what they do. And you got to understand, Kenyon Green was drafted in 2022. He has seen multiple regimes at this point. And it just might not have been a good fit for him. So I don't mind that they traded him. But at the same time, like, who is on this offensive line? And I get the temptation to take Emeka Egbuka, who I really, really like. I'm a huge Emeka Egbuka fan. I have mocked him here myself, but that was before they traded Laramie Tunsil. Now, like, if Kelvin Banks falls to 25, this is a home run pick. If Kelvin Banks is not here, I like Gray Zabel here. I like Obviously Kelvin Banks, Josh Connerly here potentially, or Emeka Egbuka because you could address the line later in the class because there's always some studs in the second and third round, even through the seventh round for the offensive line. It happens every year. I understand the argument for Egbuka because they've needed this slot receiver that they've wanted to feature, and they had that in Tank Dell. Hopefully he can come back. I'm skeptical because his injury was bad. And I'm not saying he's not going to work hard. I think he's a great person. I'm just saying it was a tough injury. And I know someone personally who went through similar to what he went through and just was never the same again. And I think that Emeka Egbuka could be what Tank Dell was or John Mechie was, or what they wanted John Mechie to be pre-cancer. Thank God he came back and is healthy. But so I understand he even says previously I have mocked Emeka Egbuka to the Texans. But again, with the departure of Larry Tunsil now, you cannot play games with CJ Stroud. Last thing you need is the franchise getting hurt, who people are now sour on CJ Stroud, which is kind of nuts to me. At pick 26, we got Trey Amos to the Chargers, and the Rams. And for me, I have one fit for the Rams that I think is perfect in my mind. And I'm curious to see how they go about the draft because you can look at the roster on paper and say, oh, well, they need a corner. My counter argument is this defense was like a top 7 unit the last 10 weeks of play. So, yeah, go ahead, bring in corner depth if you need it. But personally, if you're putting Puka outside now full time and you need to replace Cooper Kupp, Luther Burden is the best Cooper Kupp replacement in this class. Monster yards after catch guy, plays in the slot, is being criminally undervalued because of quarterback play. I personally would like this to be Luther Burden over corner because I don't think defense. I think the defense is so young and it started to play so well at the back end of the year. There's no need to. Not that Trey Amos is forcing it here because I think Trey Amos is going to be a very good corner in the NFL. I just think that outside of Puka, who do you have? Tutu Atwell and you bring in Devontae Adams. I'm forgetting about Devontae Adams, which again people are kind of pooping on that signing, and it's like you didn't watch. I get it, it's the Jets, so you probably didn't watch him, but so I take back everything I said. I think Trey Amos is the pick here, unless they want to go interior offensive line or maybe tackle, or again, I think Luther Burden. You're getting an element of that offense back that Devontae Adams probably isn't bringing at this point in his career. But it's just because I'm very high on Luther Burden, and to me, he reminds me a lot of Cooper Kupp. So at pick 27 here, we have the Ravens with Derek Harmon. I don't hate this pick, but I do hate it at the same time because I don't think Derek Harmon is a bad player, and I think that interior defensive line the Ravens need, but I think that someone needs to remind everybody that there are 3 corners on this roster right now. You have Nate Wiggins, who is your young stud, Marlon Humphrey, who's getting older, and then Jalen Armour Davis. That's it. So for me, I would like this to be corner. I think that this is, BPA meets need of this could be Trey Amos. This could be Ezra Thomas. This could be Siobhan Ravel. This could be like any corner you want because this cornerback class is pretty loaded at the top end. And there are some sneaky picks that you could take at the back end, and I'm sure the Ravens are an organization who drafts so well every year. The reason the Ravens are in this position, in my opinion, is because they're very similar to the Eagles in that they draft before they need to. The problem is they've missed on these corners throughout the years. So, in the blink of an eye, you go from Marlon Humphrey and the other guy, I'm blanking on his name right now, to Nate Wiggins and nobody else. So that's why I think they need to touch the secondary up, especially because they got gashed through the air last season. So I don't hate that Derek Harmon here. I just don't think it's the pick for the Ravens. Lions at pick 28 go Mykel Williams. Someone inside the top 15, in my opinion, is going to take Mykel Williams because he's such a freak of nature. My issue is he has a very low pass rush win rate, which is a translatable metric in the NFL, especially if you play in the SEC. So I get the allure. You just got to be really confident you can develop him. And I think with James Pierce here, who has one of the highest pass rush win rates in the entire class, or Walter Nolan, or Princely Umanmielen, or, these guys, TJ Sanders to play on the interior, Kenneth Grant, there are safer picks to address the same weakness than Mykel Williams. And my counter argument was, if you hit on Mykel Williams, what's his ceiling? And is it that much higher than a Princely Umanmielen? Is it that much higher than a James Pierce? Et cetera, et cetera. So I don't hate this pick because I think that he's addressing need with arguably BPA to some. My pushback is, you're sure you can develop him, because that's what it's going to come down to. So then at pick 29, we have the Washington Commanders taking Ezra Thomas. I like this pick. I like this pick a lot, especially since they traded for Laremy Tunsil, and I do not like Deebo Samuel. I think that Deebo Samuel, his time in the light is over. I never viewed him as a top-end wide receiver. I think he was very good for what the 49ers needed him to be. But me personally, I'm going on a tangent. I'm not saying I would address wide receiver here. I just wouldn't look as Deebo Samuel as the answer for your wide receiver too. But with that being said, they've made moves to address tackle and receiver. So addressing the secondary, which is the next biggest need, evidently, is a great pick. And I think Ezra Thomas, who's someone I'm very high on, especially if you follow me on Twitter, I like this pick a lot. And I hate it as a Giants fan because now we have the Eagles, who are like the next dynasty in the NFL. And then you got basically the 49ers being built on your doorstep with an elite quarterback. So, yeah, awesome for the Giants. Buffalo Bills at pick 30. Kenneth Grant. I love this pick. I think the Bills are going to address defensive line in some way or another. I think it's, you bring in Joey Bosa, so maybe that rules out edge here. But the interior still needs work. And I know a lot of people like Keon Coleman. I am not a Keon Coleman fan. And I think receiver is still a big need. You traded for Amari Cooper last year. You're not bringing him back. So who really is your guy on offense? I would argue it's Khalil Shakir, but he needs help. You got James Cook, who wants a lot of money. But anyway, with how freaky Josh Allen is, and then you hope Dalton Kincaid could step up in some way. Because I had high hopes for him, and he has not worked out as well as we all thought. And I don't know if that's a scheme thing. I don't know if that's a whatever thing, but I would argue that receiver is still a very, very big need on this team. But Kenneth Grant, I think, is a phenomenal pick for this, because I think Kenneth Grant, probably somewhere between interior defensive lineman 3 or 4. I would have Mason Graham at 1, and I would be very, very close behind him, Walter Nolan. And then I probably would have Kenneth Grant and Omar Norman Lott I'm getting very high on, but I would have Derek Harmon ahead of him. So with all that being said, do with that what you will, but I do like this pick a lot for the Bills. Chiefs basically pencil in any tackle you want, because I've mocked Josh Simmons here. I've mocked Josh Connerly here. I have exhausted Chiefs going tackle. And after the Super Bowl, I don't think anybody's going to argue that they need a tackle, because they got worked in the trenches on both sides of the ball. But I'm not going to stick my nose up on a team that gets worked by the Eagles offensive line, because that's just what they do. And then the last pick of the draft, we have the Eagles going Shamar Stewart. Shamar Stewart's a very polarizing prospect, just because he's kind of an enigma in terms of intangibles. He's such a big guy, and teams are going to fall in love with that like they do with Mykel Williams. The Eagles are such a hard team to mock, though, because they just have things. They just got so much depth, like, everywhere. I can't believe they got Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean last year. If you followed my channel last year, you know how high I was on both of those guys. I thought the whole safety argument for Cooper DeJean was the dumbest thing I've ever seen, which I was right about. Quinyon Mitchell being the most overthought prospect in the draft, I was right about. They got both. So then you got Nolan Smith, who I was also very high on when he came out in 23, and they got him at the back end of the first that year. Don't know how that happened. and he's finally taking strides being healthy. But the Eagles can go a myriad of directions. They could go edge. They could go. I think, Howie's no stranger to addressing something before he needs to. I wouldn't be shocked if tackle was in play here with Lane Johnson, but I also am probably forgetting they've already drafted Lane Johnson's replacement at some point in the draft throughout the years. So with all that being said, that's going to wrap up Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If I said anything wrong or say anything incorrectly about your team, go ahead and correct me in the comments. I want to give out the best content I can, and if I'm forgetting something, please don't hesitate to correct me in the comments. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next video. Peace!